Welcome to the 2024 Richmond Voter Initiative Forum. Good evening. My name is Ruthie Abelson, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters of West Contra Costa County and the Vice President of Membership. Tonight's forum is being co-hosted by the League of Women Voters of West Contra Costa County, Black Women Organized for Political Action, the Richmond Chamber of Commerce, and the Richmond branch of the NAACP. And this forum is produced in coordination with KCRT. Our forum will be moderated by one of the League of Women Voter members, Cheryl Cotton, who is the Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction of the California Department of Education. As a 30-year educator and administrator, Cheryl is an advocate for students and educators. She currently serves on the board of Contra Costa Youth Services Bureau, the League of Women Voters for West Contra Costa County, and she's a resident of San Pablo.
Welcome to our Richmond Voting Initiatives Forum. Before we begin, I would like to review a few housekeeping items. We've already solicited questions from the public. We are also providing an opportunity for our guests, our in-person guests, to ask questions. For those of you here in the council chambers who have a question, please raise your hand and a volunteer will provide you with a note card and pencil for your question. Let us know when you're done and we will collect it and add it to our question list if time permits. This is also a Zoom webinar. Our chat and Q&A features are both disabled. You can still email your questions to our Google form at http://tiny.cc/questions with a capital Q 2024. The Google Form submissions will be monitored during the forum. Our Zoom audience's microphones will be muted and the videos are turned off. The webinar is being recorded, and at the end of the program, the video will be posted to the social media of the sponsoring organizations. Additionally, KCRT Television is broadcasting this webinar today and will rebroadcast the program. The dates and times will be posted on your screen at the end of the webinar. The League of Women Voters takes positions on many issues and supports electoral systems at each level of government that encourage participation, are verifiable and auditable, and enhance representation for all voters. The November ballot in Richmond has two initiatives regarding voting: Measure J, the Richmond Majority Vote Initiative, and Measure L, the Instant Runoff Voting Initiative. Measure J is a citizens' initiative placed on the ballot by collecting voters' signatures. Measure L was placed on the ballot by a vote of the Richmond City Council. This forum will provide information on both of these measures, as well as on the voting system currently in use. The format of our event is that each measure will be given time as follows. Helen Nolan, Assistant County Registrar, will go first. Ms. Nolan will have up to 20 minutes to present an overview of both measures and an explanation of the status quo. Then, the supporters of each initiative, the order has already been determined by a coin toss, will do a presentation. 20 minutes is allotted to each presentation. We will then do Q&As. Each of the three groups will have a 2-minute time limit on each question. Questions will only be asked from the moderator. Measure J, Richmond Majority Vote, will be represented by Don Gosney, the primary proponent of the Richmond Election Reform Act. Measure L, Ranked Choice Voting, will be represented by California Ranked Choice Voting Coalition Executive Director Marcela Caballero and Ken White, Richmond resident and instant runoff voting volunteer. The timer will be available in the audience and on screen. Closing statements will be made with 3 minutes each. Let's begin. Helen Nolan, please begin your presentation.
Thank you very much. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much for having me. I am Helen Nolan. I'm the Assistant Registrar at the Elections Division in Contra Costa County. My email and my contact phone is on screen in case anyone has any questions or they'd like to get a hold of me after this is over. I feel it's my duty to bring a little bit of elections to everywhere I go. As the Assistant Registrar of Voters, it is our duty as an elections division to conduct elections in a fair, efficient, accurate, timely manner, to provide services to maintain a high level of voter registration, and to ensure that all eligible citizens can register to vote and are able to exercise their right to vote according to all federal and state statutory laws and regulations. I feel it's necessary to compare and contrast a little bit about the elections in 2024. We just went through the March 5th presidential primary, and we are coming up to the November 5th presidential general. In March 5th, we had a little over 710,000 registered voters. As of today, we have over 719,000. We're anticipating reaching around 725,000. In March, we had a 37% turnout, almost 270,000 voters cast ballots. In contrast, in our general election, we're expecting at least an 85% turnout, which will mean over 615,000 registered voters. We had 40 secure drop boxes. We now have 43. In March, we had 31 different ballot types. In November, we have 188. In March, we hired 62 seasonal workers and 894 poll workers. In November, we are anticipating 100 seasonal workers in and around our office and over 1,200 poll workers. Little information about what we're looking at. Voter information guides were mailed. It includes the locations of all drop boxes and voting sites. At the end of November, you should have already received that. If not, give our office a call. Ballots were mailed on Monday. A lot of them have hit the mailboxes. And in Richmond, these two measures should be on every city resident's ballot. The last day to register online, if you have not received your ballot, is October 21st, where you can email us or call us. Starting November 1st, Friday, Saturday, Monday, and Election Day, 5 early voting sites open, including one in the city of Richmond. Election Day is November 5th, and is our ballot postmark deadline. Must be postmarked on November 5th, and we can receive it up to 7 days after, but it has to be postmarked or received by us in our hand by 8 p.m. So before I go into what's on the Richmond ballot, I wanted to go into a little bit about what the status quo is and what we currently do. As do the majority of cities, according to state law, the city council and the mayor's races alternate every other year by going into by districts now. They are appearing strictly on the general election, and the plurality of votes elects the next council member, mayor, treasurer, city clerk, whatever their bylaws or their statute says that are up for election. So the way that these two measures are aiming to change that, so as you heard, Measure J was brought to the ballot by the voters of Richmond by petition. Measure L was brought to the ballot by the City Council. Both are aimed at fixing a perceived inadequacy in the current system. Both would change from the current system from a plurality to a majority. Both will cost the city a significant amount of money. And both measures cannot exist together, so both cannot pass. This is a very high-level explanation of what each measure is. You'll hear definitely more in depth from the experts sitting to my left and my right. So Measure J seeks to add a primary election to the municipal process to elect city council members and the mayor. So all candidates would appear on the primary ballot in either March or June. And the reason that switches from month to month is because in California, we hold our gubernatorial primaries in June and our presidential primaries in March. That is state law. The top two vote getters, instead of being just elected, the top two would move to the general ballot in November, which is the current process for federal, state, and countywide contests. Measure J also mandates that any vacancies on the council not filled by appointment must have special, primary, and general elections. And all vacancies for mayor must have special primary and special general elections held. What is Measure L? Measure L seeks to move the existing municipal election to an instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting method. And again, a very high-level overview here. All candidates would appear on the November general election ballot. Voters would need to rank their choices of candidates in order from first, second, third, and so on, depending on how many candidates are on the ballot. The first round of voting is tabulated. If no one candidate has a majority of the vote, then the candidate with the least amount of votes is eliminated from the voting. Those who chose that candidate as their first choice, then their ballots get retabulated using their second choice. And this continues in a round until one person, one candidate, has at least 50% plus one of the vote, meaning a majority. So a quick cost comparison. Like I said, this is going to be expensive no matter which way it goes. There's no way around it. Primary elections that are currently consolidated with a county election cost between $250 to $350 per registered voter, or in this case, with roughly 60,000 registered voters in Richmond, that's between about $150,000 to $210,000 per election. It can go up from there depending on how many contests are on the ballot. If there's a citywide measure, that can increase significantly because that contest is appearing on all 60,000 registered voters' ballots rather than, say, 7,000 or 8,000 by district. General elections that are consolidated will cost roughly the same as a primary. Special elections for vacancies cost between $11 and $14 per registered voter, or roughly $650,000 to $850,000 for a citywide contest. That is because in consolidated primary and general elections, the city shares the cost among all other jurisdictions that are participating. In a special election, they are bearing 100% of the cost themselves. The cost to publish a candidate statement and run 2 campaigns would also be doubled for certain candidates. The ranked choice voting model would require a new module and licensing through the county's current voting system vendor. This is possible. To my understanding, it could be done without major reconfiguration. We would need to negotiate an amendment to our existing contract to purchase the module. The module itself costs $150,000 as a one-time procurement cost and would require an additional approximately $17,500 for on-site support and training. That's to train our staff how to use the module. And I say that because we don't currently use it. We don't currently know how to run it. We would need to be trained by the vendor who created it. Ongoing costs on top of that. There's a $35,000 yearly licensing fee, but because elections only run every 2 years, save for any special elections, we would need to charge $70,000 per year to the city. Additional ballot layout costs, printing, test decks, logic and accuracy testing, 1% manual. The ranked choice voting would require an additional card per voter. We're estimating about $100,000 to $120,000 per general. The costs above are in addition to the existing estimated $2.50 per registered voter that they currently pay to consolidate the election, about $150 to $210, and that goes back to what a general election that are consolidated normally cost. So in closing, both measures will be on every City of Richmond voters' ballots in November. The full text of the measure, an impartial analysis, financial analysis by the city attorney, arguments in favor and against, and rebuttals to those arguments in favor and against are available for both measures in your county voter information guide. And those guides are also available and can be accessed on our website digitally at contracostavote.gov. And I want to close with the most important thing to remember going away from this. Both measures cannot exist in the same space. If they both pass, the one that receives the most votes will be implemented and the other will fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Marcela Caballero and Ken White, please begin your presentation.
Thank you. Are the slides up? I'm Ken White. I've lived in Richmond for 10 years, my wife, and we love the diverse and lively culture here and the broad range of good people who are working to strengthen our community. Thanks also to the League of Women Voters. I partnered closely with the League in Massachusetts when I worked on electoral and campaign reform there, and it was a pleasure to work with the League. And I was even a member for a while. I kind of laughed when I came to California. You'll have to get back to me on that. I'm joined by Marcela.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcela Caballero. I'm the Executive Director here at California Ranked Choice Voting Institute. I'm very glad to be here tonight, and I'm so happy that you are all hosting this forum tonight. We're going to be talking a little bit more about how we can improve elections here in Richmond and how we can join a growing number of cities that now have instant runoff voting across the country.
And we're going to try to explain how instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting, as you'll sometimes hear us say, works. Marcel is an expert in that. And why it is the most cost-effective and broadly inclusive way for us Richmonders to elect our city council and mayor with a clear majority. So thank you, Helen. It was a very helpful explanation of Richmond's current voting system. Just to emphasize, it does not require a majority winner, just as this contest between these two ballot initiatives does not necessarily require a majority winner. So under our current plurality system, the winner just needs to earn the most votes. Candidates can be elected even when the majority of voters actually wanted someone else. And that's why Measure L is on the ballot. It's an opportunity to join our neighbors in Albany, San Francisco, and other places that have successfully implemented instant runoff voting. So where we agree, I think it's pretty clear that, and as Helen noted, we agree that Richmond should have elections that yield clear majority winners, and we support that goal. As a Richmond resident, I support two other outcomes that will arise from implementing instant runoff voting. Our elected officials are representative of the people they serve, and majority elections are fair, effective, and inclusive. And that's where there are real and important differences between the two measures. Measure L, instant runoff voting, meets all three of those goals: majority support, more representative, and inclusive. Measure J, or RERA, fails because it is much less inclusive, not more inclusive, not only compared with Measure L, but compared to the existing system, which both sides say we want to replace. Measure J would mean fewer people will have a say in electing their representatives and will reduce voter participation by nearly 50% for all Richmond voters, as Helen hopefully noted, and by another 10 to 20% estimated for minority voters. That's because voter turnout over the last couple of decades in general elections is typically twice that of existing primary and other elections. Measure L, on the other hand, will maximize voter turnout by using the existing general election, where turnout in the presidential elections, for example, hovers around 80%. On these vitally important measures, Measure L is a clear winner for all Richmond voters. Just catching up. So RERA adds a separate low turnout primary election, which would reduce voter participation by 20 to 40% because A candidate who wins a majority of votes in a low turnout primary is elected outright, and that means there's no say for general election voters. Or if the top two finishers advance to from the primary to compete in the general election voters have only two choices. So it's a false solution. It adds another election, which is a burden to the candidates who have to run two campaigns. This effectively freezes out candidates who don't have big money backers. And second, Richmond primaries historically, there you go. Second, Richmond primaries historically have more than a third to half less turnout than general election. These voters tend not to be as representative of the city as the general election voters. And under RERA, primary voters could select a winner without a runoff, meaning that over a third of Richmond voters would then be essentially disenfranchised. If a runoff is needed under RERA, most voters will not have had a say in selecting the two runoff candidates. For example, 30% of eligible voters are Latino, but they make up only half of that in the primary electorate compared to 2/3 in the general electorate. So while we still need to work toward fuller representation from all Richmonders, the general election is substantially more representative of Latinos than the primary. Under RERA, races would be decided either outright in a poorly attended primary or in a two-person runoff during a general election between candidates selected by a minority of voters. So instant runoff voting means more choice and more voice. Instant runoff voting can be conducted at the general election without requiring a separate primary election. This avoids the clearly documented problems of low turnout. Instant runoff voting ensures that the winner has support from the majority, not just a faction. And with IRV, voters can express their preferences more clearly. Under Measure L, there would be one election and one clear winner elected by a majority of the voters.
Thank you, Ken. So instant runoff voting, also known as ranked choice voting, is the fastest growing nonpartisan reform in the nation. Currently, it's being used by more than 50 jurisdictions here across the country and used by more than 11 million voters. In California specifically, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, and San Leandro use ranked choice voting. Redondo Beach, Eureka, and Albany have already passed ranked choice voting. However, they are in the process of implementing it. Additionally, Maine, Alaska, and New York City, as well as 23 cities in Utah, currently use ranked choice voting. Before I get into how IRV works and how the tabulation is actually calculated, I do want to mention that ranked choice voting is used in Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Australia. It's also used by several universities and corporations to elect their governing boards, and it's also been used in the Academy Awards to select their nominees for their current categories. If we can get some technical assistance with the video, that would be greatly appreciated.
Hi, I'm Mahir, and welcome to my bodega. As you may know, New York City has a new way to vote in special and primary elections. So, how does ranked choice voting work? The next time you vote in a city election, instead of choosing just one candidate, you can rank them all from your first choice to your fifth. Here's how it works. Let's say my bodega is picking its featured snack of the month. So many choices! Which one should I feature? This customer ranks Parker Pretzels as her top favorite. She also ranks her second choice, Mr. Chips, third choice, Chi-Chi Chicharrones, fourth choice, Gladys Gummies, and fifth choice, Poppy Popcorn. Other customers rank their choices as well. If Parker Pretzels is the favorite choice and wins more than 50% of all the first ranked choices, then Parker Pretzels is the winner and is featured as the snack of the month. However, if no snack gets more than 50%, then the least popular snack is eliminated. Sorry, Figgy Bars. The remaining second-ranked choices from customers who chose Figgy Bars are redistributed. So if customers chose chips and chicharrones as second choices, then those two snacks receive additional votes. The new totals are counted and the process repeats until there's a winner of the final two. Congrats, Poppy Popcorn, you're the bodega snack favorite. Back in the real world, before it's time to vote for humans, visit ranktthevoteny.org for more information. Thank you, New York City, for voting and for making these special and primary elections your elections.
Awesome. Thank you so much to the tech team. So again, how does IRV exactly work when it comes to tabulation? Hypothetically speaking, if we had IRV here in Richmond, we would use it in the general election to rank our candidates in order of preference. If no candidate receives 50% plus one, like mentioned in the video, the first choice votes we move on to the second place and we start using rankings. So how exactly does that look? I have a little visual here for you all. So the candidate with the least number of votes is eliminated and their votes are assigned to the voters' second choices. So here in round one, candidate A has 30 votes, candidate B has 17 votes, candidate C has 32, and candidate D has 12. Candidate E has 9. Now, as mentioned in the video, we're going to get rid of the lowest vote getter. In this case, this would be candidate E. So we're going to go ahead and cross out candidate E. Now, those 9 votes are going to get redistributed in that second round because in this first round, nobody received that 50% plus 1. So as you can see here in the second round, candidate A gained 5 votes, candidate B gained 2 votes, and candidate C gained 1 vote, and candidate D gained 1 vote. So those 9 votes were redistributed. Now, who is the lowest vote getter here? It's candidate D. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of him again because nobody received 50% plus 1 in this round. We're going to continue going until we can get that 50% plus 1. So here in round 3, in this instant runoff, candidate A received 6 votes from those 13 votes that candidate D had. Candidate B received 4 votes here, and then candidate C received 3 votes. Again, nobody has received 50% plus 1, so we're going to go ahead and go again. Candidate B gets eliminated as the lowest vote getter. We're going to go again to the 4th round because nobody has received 50% plus 1. And here, those 23 votes for candidate B get redistributed into candidate A and candidate C. Now we've finally reached that 50% plus 1. Who's the winner? Candidate A. So we're going to eliminate candidate C. So as I mentioned, the process continues until we get that 50% plus 1. It is possible that in that first round, you do get somebody who gets that 50% plus 1. It's also possible that they win in the second or the third round. It doesn't necessarily have to happen in the 4th or the 5th round, but I just wanted to share this with you all so you could see visually how it works. So IRV empowers minority voters and candidates. Why are we so excited about IRV? So when it comes to voters of color, they understand IRV. I know a lot of people say this is confusing, but in an exit poll done in New York City, we found that 93% of voters of color found their ballot simple to complete. Now, additionally, we found that voters of color ranked more candidates on their ballots compared to white voters, and this was done in an Oakland exit poll in 2022. When it comes to candidates of color, we get rid of that spoiler effect. There's no spoiler penalty, as we mentioned. Multiple candidates can run without splitting the vote. Now, what does that mean? It means that sometimes we get folks who say, maybe I don't want to run for that same seat because somebody that already looks like me or has my same values is running, and I don't want to spoil their votes and steal their votes. But when you're a candidate of color and you're running under an IRV race, that's not possible. You are not going to be vote splitting here. Additionally, you benefit from the counting process when you're a candidate of color. Now, what does that mean? It means that in our studies, candidates of color pick up more transfer votes than white or other candidates. IRV helps more communities of color win. Currently, Oakland has 6 councilors of color, which make up 75% of their council. 3 of them are Black, 2 are Asian, and 1 is Latino. Before IRV was implemented, the Oakland City Council was 50% white. In the 4 Bay Area cities using RCV, 61% of elected offices are held by people of color. That's up from 38% pre-IRV. Now, in New York City specifically, before they used it in 2021, it had not elected a pretty diverse city council, which is kind of hard to believe considering New York City's diversity. But post IRV, they elected 51% of women to their city council. Additionally, IRV elevates Latino candidates and voters. IRV incentivizes campaigning beyond bases of support. What does that mean? It means that you have to coalition build. So when you're running for office in IRV, you are asking other fellow candidates to campaign with you. So when they're knocking on doors, they're going to say, hey, you know, I'm so-and-so. I would like for you to vote for me as your first choice, but vote for my fellow candidate over here as your second choice. And so you're coalition building, you're minimizing the mudslinging that sometimes happens in elections because you're doing that coalition building. So you're campaigning beyond those bases of support because you might be knocking on doors that are not necessarily your usual base because you're asking for them to rank you on your ballot. Additionally, IRV removes barriers to entry for office for candidates. There are some candidates that do not want to run for office because they feel like they don't have the treasure chest fund or the endorsements or the support that they need to really run a strong campaign. And with IRV, you don't need a big treasure chest fund because you're not running a primary election, which sometimes is a big deal for folks that don't have that treasure chest fund, especially BIPOC candidates. With IRV, Black candidates win more often. What we found with IRV is that Black candidates won 51% of IRV elections where there was one other Black candidate running. Additionally, we found that Black candidates won 69% of the races of IRV elections with 2 or more Black candidates. Now, this is compared to a statistic here where Black candidates won 38% of the time in regular plurality elections where other Black candidates were running for office. Now, this is specifically in Bay Area cities with non-IRV, such as San Jose, Santa Clara, Alameda, and Richmond. So I have a little chart here for myth versus fact. I hear a lot of myths about IRV, one of them being that it's too confusing. As I mentioned earlier in an exit poll that was done in New York City, for their first time using RCV, 90% of voters ranked 2 or more candidates on their ballot, and 95% of all voters said that they found their ballot easy to complete. That was regardless of age, race, education, language spoken, and income level. Additionally, I've heard that, you know, IRV leads to election errors. One of the big ones that comes up is Oakland. The fact here is the cause of this error was a human error, not a software error. An incorrect setting to the machine was made by staff that suspended ballots that had a write-in as their first choice or skipped their first choice instead of counting those votes as their second choice. Once the right setting was chosen, the aggregate results were generated with a push of a button. Unfortunately, the change in result created ill will with the Rainia's winner and his supporter, and this is why Helen mentioned that there needs to be extensive training of staff when it comes to implementing IRV. Another myth that I've heard is RCV leads to voters making mistakes on their ballots. Again, studies show that RCV ballots have the same error rate that existing ballots have. In fact, some of the errors that are currently committed on existing ballots are usually folks trying to rank candidates. So it's something that's already being done by some folks. Additionally, another myth that I've heard is if I don't rank all the candidates, my vote won't count. That is incorrect. If you choose to rank one candidate, which is what we call bullet ranking, your vote still goes to the person that you support. Us as IRV supporters and advocates, we don't want folks to vote for one person because IRV is essentially giving the voters the power to choose who they want or select folks that are a little more palpable, and that way you don't end up with someone that you absolutely don't like. So we encourage you to vote and to rank these candidates, but I understand that some folks would just like to vote for one candidate. But again, your ballot will be counted. So this one, passing on to you, Ken.
Wow, thank you. Very much appreciate it. So just to bring it back to Richmond and, reiterate the points that have been made, the biggest voter turnout happens with the November general election. So under Measure L, we would have a majority winner that would best represent the electorate, not having someone who comes out of a poorly attended primary. There we go. Measure L allows voters to rank candidates, and this gives voters more choice and more voice. As Marcela mentioned, 95% of those notoriously hard to please New Yorkers said they found the ballot easy to complete. So it's not a problem of difficulty. Measure L will increase voter participation by staying with the traditional one round of voting during the higher turnout November general election. This is supported by the data, as Marcela mentioned. 3 large Bay Area cities, Berkeley, Oakland, and San Francisco, have all seen an increase in voter turnout since switching from a 2-round runoff, like Measure J or RERA would have, to IRV. And finally, Measure L eliminates the need for vote splitting and the spoiler effect. Oh, I don't want to waste my vote by voting for candidate A, and I just have to hold my nose and vote for candidate B. No, you get to express fully your preferences.
You're at 2 minutes.
Great. And candidates are more likely to build coalitions, and endorsing organizations are more likely to support several good candidates instead of just one. Already, Measure L has been endorsed by the Contra Costa Labor Council, United Teachers of Richmond, the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Local 21 of AFL-CIO Professional and Technical Engineers, and by Fair Vote, a national voting rights organization. So thank you for your time. I urge you to vote no on J and yes on L, and build a more inclusive democracy here in Richmond, where everyone is received and all voices and all voters matter. Vote for Measure L, which is a low-cost way to include more voices and offer more choices while ensuring majority support for our city councilors and mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Don Gosney, please begin your presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting and KCRT for hosting tonight's forum so that people can learn more about the Richmond Election Reform Act, the proposed version of ranked choice voting, and so we can hear from my friend Helen Nolan, who gave us a great job explaining about what's going on, how this is actually going to work. We need to learn firsthand how this will work and what it might cost. My name is Don Gosney, a lifelong resident of Richmond. My parents lived in a duplex on Ream near 24th Street when I was born, and except for a brief period when I was very young, Richmond has been my home. I chose to return to Richmond, where I was born and where I will likely die. Let's just hope that doesn't happen tonight. There is a tremendous amount of misinformation being put out, and I believe that the more the people know, the easier it will be to make an informed decision. Just like when we vote for candidates on the ballot, isn't it better to know as much as we can about them before we cast our ballot? Tonight, we're going to hear from multiple sides of the issue, along with the unbiased report from Helen Nolan and with the County Elections Office, which we've already heard. I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm here to give you enough information for you to come away believing that the Richmond Election Reform Act is the solution to many of the problems we've been facing here in Richmond these past 20 or so years. The League of Women Voters gave me an opportunity to bring in a slide deck of pretty graphics to enhance my presentation, but the only one I would want to show you would up on the screen for the full 20 minutes I've been allotted, it would just be use big bold letters saying Measure J, good, Measure L, bad. Okay, that's too hokey, so I thought I'd just talk to you. Maybe you like the pretty pictures and maybe not. If you live long enough, you get to be known around the community. I've been attending almost all of our city council and school board meetings, either in person or remotely, for more than a half a century. I try to get to know as many of our community leaders as I can when they allow it. I try to stay as informed as I can about the issues, so before I rise to speak about an issue, before I talk to my neighbors, before I post articles on social media comments, maybe I know something about the issues. By staying informed and staying in touch, I can often rise to speak when others cannot. And that's what tonight is all about, helping the public become better informed before they cast their votes. I was born here in Richmond and have spent the vast majority of my 70 years here. I'm a proud graduate of Kennedy High shortly after it opened, and my time at Cal has helped make me to be what I am today. Go Eagles, go Bears. What we have before us on our ballot are 3 options. We can choose to elect members of our city council and mayor in the same manner that we select all elected officials from county supervisor up to the food chain to governor by ensuring that whomever is elected, they receive at least 50% plus 1 of the votes cast. We can use the ranked choice system, or we can stick with the system we have in place now. The 54% plus 1 majority vote option is Measure J on your ballot. Ranked choice is Measure L. If either Measure J or Measure L receive 50% plus 1 of the votes cast, whichever one gets the most votes may become the law of the land in Richmond. The charter will be amended accordingly. If neither of them garner the 50% plus 1 requirement, then they both fail, and we will continue to elect our council and mayor the same way we do today. In all of the social media posts and the oversized postcards you've received, the part that is not being mentioned is that even if ranked choice passes and is declared the law of the land, the fine print says that if the city council decides that it's impractical to implement ranked choice for any election, they can stick with what we have today. And that should concern us all. In a more perfect world, both sides tonight would focus on simply convincing of the merits of their measure. Because they are going head-to-head, though, I'm going to try to point out why the Richmond Election Reform Act is better for Richmond and why ranked choice would not. When you walk away from this forum, my hope is that you're going to look at your friends or your partner and say that Don knows what he's talking about and is looking after what's best for Richmond. And then you're going to fill out your ballot and vote yes on Measure J and no on Measure L. You may be asking yourself, why so much time, effort, and money has been spent on the Richmond Election Reform Act? Why have so many thousands of friends, neighbors, and coworkers taken money and time away from their families to make a better Richmond? What led to it being proposed? And that's an outstanding question. I'm one of those people that believes in the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, what we have here in Richmond is a system that I and at least 15,159 voters who signed our petitions believe is broken. We have a group here in Richmond that has been pushing their agenda for 20 years now, and they've been very successful at controlling the narrative. But have these people really been speaking for the people? How many times have they reached out to learn what you think and what direction you want the city to head in? If they had a printed election book, I'd bet good money that on page 1 it would require that they only run one candidate for each office and encourage numerous others to run against them and split the vote. It's an extremely effective election strategy. On page 2, it would call for them to find a wedge issue to split the community. Think back over the past 15 years to our elections. Remember Point Malati, sugary sweetened drinks, rent control, Measure U, the business tax, Chevron, Gaza, suing Chevron, more rent control, and taxing Chevron. Hey, if you find something that works, why not return to it again and again? Why are some of the community leaders so fixated on finding ways to divide us instead of bringing us together? One of the many problems with the way we currently elect people is that all too frequently we elect people with only about 35% of the votes. And to pour salt on the wound, after their victory, they'll try to convince us that the people have spoken. The people haven't spoken. 35% of the people have spoken. And then there's always the problem of trying to reach out to our elected officials and having our phone calls, voicemails, texts, emails, and letters fall into the black hole here in City Hall. Unless you're part of their core group of supporters, you probably will never be heard. It was only a couple of months back when I went to the dais to speak, and one member of the council forgot she had an open mic and made a disparaging remark for everyone in the room and at home on TV to hear, disparaging me just for rising to speak. Should we have elected representatives that can show such disdain for any of us? How can we have elected leaders that boast that we're speaking for the people without benefit of actually speaking with the people? So many tens of thousands of our neighbors and working men and women banded together to put the Richmond Election Reform Act on the ballot to require that if someone wants to represent the people, that candidate will need the support of at least half of the voters. This is an election issue, and this being America, we all know that there will be a lot of misinformation disseminated. As they say, why let a good lie get in the way of a good argument? It doesn't matter if it's candidates seeking election or proponents of ballot measures and propositions. People are going to try to bamboozle you into believing that what they have put in front of you. I'm absolutely sure that the people sitting up here trying to sell you on ranked choice are decent people, but the truth of the matter is that none of them knows them. We don't know their backgrounds, their history, their backstories. Heck, until tonight, we didn't even know their names. We don't know anything about the so-called nonprofits that they represent. When we had the nonprofits come before the council a few months back trying to sell us on ranked choice, several of us tried looking into these nonprofits, and I gotta tell you, getting information about them is pretty tough, nigh on impossible. In particular, trying to find out where their financing is coming from was incredibly tough. When it comes to politics, the golden rule is to follow the money, but the source of their funding was nearly impossible to determine. Exactly who is pushing for ranked choice in community after community and state after state, and what's their agenda? I used to think I was a pretty smart guy till I tried to learn more about these people and their organization. Exactly what are these people and their funders trying to hide? The only thing I have to sell to the community is my own integrity. When all this is over and done, these people will move on, and I'll still be here. If you can't count on my integrity, then what use am I to your community? We don't have to argue on the technical merits of a project, but I hope that you can look at me and know that I'm an honest person. Let's talk about how we got here. To put a measure on the ballot, after filing the paperwork and paying the city fee, a fee that came out of my pocket, the paperwork goes to the city's attorney's office where they do what attorneys do. Then you have to gather signatures, a lot of them. Only valid signatures of Richmond voters count, and that's where we run into problems. We can stare a voter in the eyes and ask them point blank, are you a registered voter here in Richmond? And after they say they are, they sign the petition. The rub is that a great many of them are not. Whether it's by accident or whether it's a calculated maneuver to mess with the process, we will never know. But it's only valid signatures that count. Nonetheless, by the time we finished, we collected 132.8% of the valid signatures needed. Actually a lot of somebody's believe in what we're trying to do. It was only after we turned in our valid signatures that the council decided to bring in their own out-of-town hired promoters to try to sell the community on ranked choice. Well, it took us a tremendous amount of effort and boatloads of money to gather our signatures. All it took from them was the mayor and 3 of his allies to raise their hands and place ranked choice on the ballot. No filing fees, no signature gathering, no standing in the cold and rain out in front of grocery stores. All he had to do was say aye when called upon. One of the deceptions, the lies put out by the group supporting ranked choice is that out-of-town interests paid for the signatures. Even worse, they invoked their fallback boogeyman, Chevron, trying to bamboozle the voters into believing that unlike ranked choice, this is being pushed by bad people. First off, Chevron had zero input in this process. They were never approached, they never offered assistance, and they certainly didn't pay for anything. Anyone that tries to tell you different is just plain lying to you because they think you're gullible enough to believe it. We didn't need Chevron. Working men and women, people that live here in Richmond, people that work here in Richmond, through their unions, took money off of their paychecks and voted to place this on the ballot. We've heard representatives of some of the groups going on TV and going on the record bad-mouthing the Richmond Election Reform Act, saying that 100% of their members are against us and support ranked choice. Unlike their groups and unions, the Building Trades Union, the primary funders of this effort, they hold regular membership meetings where the issue is brought before them, discussed, and then voted on for approval. As a retired president of the Steamfitters Union and a proud member for 54 years, I can assure you that our members actually support what we're doing here. One of the arguments against the Election Reform Act is that it will be more expensive. I was just looking at the ballot book and I got the other day, and according to the unbiased analysts, the numbers they quoted don't agree with that claim. There's the cost of the software upgrade for ranked choice, and we know that Dominion isn't giving that away. Then there's the cost to the city to train the voters and the county to train the staff on how ranked choice works. There's a cost associated with that as well. Somebody has to pay for these hidden costs, and that would be us. I'm sure that what they're inferring is that those candidates that don't have that much support will have a tougher time financing a campaign. On the surface, that might have some merits, but in the world we live in today, it's foot soldiers with boots on the ground and campaign work outside of the actual office campaign, official campaign, that we see more of. For instance, we're getting a lot of mailers these days for Richmond candidates, ballot measures and propositions, and for candidates higher up on the state and federal level. Virtually none of this comes from the official campaign. As an example, like a lot of you over the weekend, I received 3 oversized full-color mailers pushing all 3 candidates for the council for Measure L and for very much against Measure J. Right there on the mailer, we saw that major funding for these mailers came from SEIU 1021, the union based in Oakland representing the city workers. SEIU is the biggest union in the country, and in financial resources even God would envy. Those 3 candidates didn't even have to raise a dime for those mailers. And unless things have changed, Richmond's charter is supposed to include a provision for matching funds for less heeled candidates. And we have campaign contribution limits that prevent candidates from collecting outrageous funding from any one source. If the matching funds provision has been eliminated from our charter, we have to ask, who made that happen? Which council members made that happen? I do know that there were several council members who voted to defund the matching funds, and they came from the same group trying to kill the Richmond Election Reform Act. These are the same people who included that fine print in their motion to place ranked choice on the ballot, but required the clause that would allow them to ignore the will of the voters if they deem it to be impractical to implement ranked choice. While we're on that clause, there's nothing included in the text that defines what impractical would look like. They get to make that decision at the time. Maybe the hardcore Kool-Aid drinkers have full faith in these people, but I ain't one of them. When it comes to an elected official, and I truly hate to invoke Ronald Reagan, trust but verify needs to be the rule of the day. Let's talk about how the Richmond Election Reform Act works. Just like any other election from the county supervisor on up, we look at the names on the ballot, we vote, and if any candidate gets 50% plus 1 of the votes, the clear majority, that candidate is declared the victor. If no one clears that hurdle, then the top 2 move to the general election to decide. We saw this in action earlier this year when we had 5 candidates on the ballot for the state senate. No one met the 50% plus 1 threshold, so the top 2 on the ballots, we got under mail, one of which is Richmond's own Javanka Beckles. If a candidate gets a clear majority of 50% plus 1, not only are they declared the victor, their name doesn't even appear on the general election ballot, saving everyone a lot of money. We're also hearing that candidates of color will not fare as well if they have to run in any election other than a general election. Exactly where does that come from? I know it wasn't a local election, but I recall that Obama felt doing okay when he ran in an election other than the general election. Tony Thurmond, Rob Bonnet, and Fiona Moss seemed to fare well too. This is just another claim that can't be verified with empirical data. They follow this with a claim that voters of color don't vote in a primary, and they cite the March primary as an example. Truth be told, there wasn't anything on that ballot to make any of us want to vote. Most voters of color are Democrats, and on the ballot they received, what was there to vote for? Biden was a lock for the presidency, as was Garamendi for Congress and Wicks for Assembly. Did voters of color even care about the Senate race? There was nothing of interest to anyone. Now let's ask about these people claiming that we're trying to disenfranchise voters of color. First off, some of these people have gone so far as to say that we're bigoted racists trying to keep people of color down. Not only is that a bold-faced lie, but that's offensive and insulting. Those that are making that claim should be ashamed. And so the bigger question about how low turnout of voters of color was, what is this community group that tried to control everything done to encourage persons of color to register and vote, except when they need them to throw scare issues in front of them? What have they done? Whatever they've done, has it worked? We need community leaders that will engage our community, learn from them, and find ways to invite them into the big tent where they might feel they are part of our family. Now let's talk a little bit about ranked choice and why we should say no to that idea. Yes, ranked choice is used in a lot of places, but it's only used in a small minority of communities around the country. Why? Maybe it's because there are issues surrounding it that make it less desirable. For instance, what exactly do they mean when they tell us it's so simple? If it's so simple, when these nonprofits gave their 86 minutes presentation filled with pretty slides to the council a few months ago, why did one of the sponsors, Councilmember McLaughlin, have so many questions? Why did PhD holder Councilmember Bonner have even more questions? If it's so simple, why will Richmond need to spend hundreds of man-hours and tens of thousands of dollars to train voters how to use the system? If it's so simple, how did the Alameda County elections chief screw up not one, but two elections recently? With one of them, they swore in the so-called victor, and then the judge told them they unswear them and swear in the real winner. People are enthralled with the concept, but if you were to go out on the streets right now and ask people how it works, I can bet you'll find virtually no one that can explain how it actually works. They couldn't give you the details. Let's take a look at Oakland's race for mayor in 2022, the most recent election. It took 9 rounds before they finalized the count. Put yourself back on the streets and tell the public that in that race, when they counted the ballot in round 1, they counted 125,162 ballots. Then tell them by the time they got to round 9, they only counted 113,735 ballots. Then help them with the math so they understand that 11,427 ballots were discarded from the count in that 9-round counting. How about the 13,838 ballots discarded in 2010 in the 10-round count? And then you got to love the 16-round count in 2014, a real nail-biter. Help them understand that if we have ranked choice here in Richmond, there's a fair possibility that might be their ballot that was tossed in the can and didn't count. Make them understand that Richmond's version of democracy means that their vote doesn't count. Let's play a game. Go out in the neighborhoods and point to some of your neighbors, telling them that you, and you, your votes will be counted. Then point to the outlier and tell that person that they don't, because they don't think right, because they don't think like you, that their vote is not going to count. Now let's come back to the real world that we live in, where we know that a lot of voters of color may vote for candidates that are not the most popular. That means that by the time the ballot count is over with and done with, it's their vote that doesn't count. Now try to convince us that this isn't disenfranchising voters of color. Who's calling the kettle black now? As how many of you read the huge article in Sunday's paper about how candidates in San Francisco are gaming ranked choice? It retold the oft-told story about how lesser candidates collude with each other to use the subtleties of ranked choice to manipulate the voters and system to ensure that the leader doesn't actually win. Is this what we envision for Richmond? Is anyone so naive as to believe we don't see this in Richmond just as San Francisco and Oakland have seen it so often? Let's play another little game where we keep count of the times they claim that this is the most democratic way to elect people. Forgive me if I don't come across as being all that bright, but I have completely a different idea about what democracy actually means. In my version, every vote counts. We don't exclude anyone. We don't treat any of our neighbors like second-class citizens. Forgive me if you're from a backwards red state, but I thought that the Trumpians cornered the market on excluding certain people from being able to vote. Let's not let that happen here in Richmond. If you attend our city councils with any regularity, how many times have we heard our community leaders use Oakland as an example of how we ought to do things? Because they do it in Oakland, then we ought to do it, so when we grow up, we can be just like Oakland. All I have to say about that is, do we really want to be like Oakland? Really? What exactly do they have that we would want to emulate? Yeah, they have the better gangs that we'd have, and their unhoused problem is so much bigger than we can even hope to have, and you can buy just about any drug you want in Oakland. And the human trafficking. And so they have that down in our form. And they've perfected handling recall elections, disruptive city council and school board meetings. Their police department has been under federal review for decades, and they fired more police chiefs than they can count. Their budget is in disarray. There isn't hardly any place where the people feel safe anymore. Is this really what we want to emulate? Yeah, absolutely. Let's just be like Oakland. I can't even say that with a straight face. So considering how they botched so many of their elections with ranked choice, why would we ever want to be like Oakland? Even though the league and I could speak for 20 minutes, I know that what it's like sitting through exhausting presentations that seem to go on forever. Some of you probably were muttering under your breath about 30 seconds after I started, wondering if I would ever shut up. Sorry, but this is too important to just sit in silence. I mean, it's our future, isn't it? Before I sign off, I want to be as serious as I can be here. If ranked choice is the greatest thing since Bernie Sanders, why did it take our community activists more than 15 years before they brought it up with minimal input from that part of the community outside of their circle of friends? If ranked choice is the most democratic way of electing people, why didn't they suggest it earlier, much earlier? They were perfectly happy with the election model that they elected their people on once, but once Measure J got the requisite signatures, they knew they couldn't block it from being placed on the ballot, not at least without an extremely expensive lawsuit that they would lose. So they had this epiphany that they should force us to use ranked choice. Do not be confused here. This is all about power and not the way we saw it in the graphic on the card they sent out over the weekend. This is about control to ensure that their social agenda is enacted with minimal pushback and to ensure that the unions that support them continue to have the control they enjoy today. The last thing they want is for members of the community to have a seat at the table. When they appoint every member of the city's boards and committees, it's not unlike what we saw in the Supreme Court and in our federal courts when that orange-haired guy stacked them all so they would go along with his personal agenda. Now, bring on the questions. Oh, feel free to call me at 510-685-2403, 685-2403, but please wait till we're done here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, panelists. We will now allow each panelist to ask a question of the other panelists. Each panelist will have up to 2 minutes to respond. Let's begin with Helen. Do you have a question?
I don't, actually.
Thank you. Miranda and Ken, do you have a question?
Sure. I'm wondering exactly where your statistics on voter turnout for the primary came up, Don, because as a candidate or as a person of color, I could tell you for a fact that voters of color, it's really hard to turn them out in the primary. I've worked on campaigns for 10 to 11 years, so please tell me where you've read these statistics that that's not true.
Thank you. Don?
I didn't give you any statistics. I question your statistics as being empirical. I said that it's very difficult to determine whether a minority shows up to vote. I've never been in an election yet where they ask the color of my skin on there, so how do they know that? I mean, you can do exit polls all you want, but we certainly seen the exit polls on the presidential elections that didn't hold water either. And you can't go by names of people that voted. I mean, your last name is Smith. What color is your skin? What ethnicity are you? I said, I just don't believe that you can come up with reliable statistics on what ethnicities actually show up to vote. It doesn't pass the smell test to me.
Thank you. Helen, do you have a response to that question?
Yeah, I would just like to confirm that in our voter registration rules, we do not collect ethnicity. So I wouldn't have any statistics either on if people of color do turn out to vote or not, because, yeah, as Don said, we can't bank on a last name or even a language preference to indicate what ethnicity that person identifies as.
Thank you. Don Gosney, do you have a question for the panelists?
I've got a question for Ms. Nolan, if I don't mind. During the primary election, won't the cost be split between Measure J and all other items that are on that ballot?
Technically, yes. A primary typically is not very well shared among local jurisdictions. We don't charge the state or the federal government or the other county departments for their portion of the election. So a primary is not shared as widely as a general would be among other jurisdictions.
Thank you. Miranda, Ken, do you have a response?
To either one or just Ms. Nolan specifically?
Either one.
Okay. I mean, yes, you're right. The County Registrar of Voters does not collect that information on, voters. We don't ask that specific information. But if someone has worked on campaigns for over 10 years now and has worked in communities of color, specifically Latinos, I could tell you that it's like pulling teeth to get people out to to the ballot boxes or to send out their ballots. So you do see that when you're working on campaigns across the country, and people who are working as field director, campaign managers do see that pretty often. So the statistics come from that, from the people who are working on campaigns, who are doing studies on that end specifically, and that's why I mentioned it.
Thank you. Now we will move into questions from the public. Each panelist will have 2 minutes to respond. Our first question: do the ranked choice systems differ from community to community, or are they all exactly the same? Let's start with Helen.
Well, I really can't honestly speak to this. Like I said, Contra Costa has not used the system before. I personally have not implemented a ranked choice voting system before. So I'm not the expert to speak to how the different systems may or may not coalesce or be different.
Thank you, Helen. Miranda, Ken?
To answer that question, no, not all ranked choice or IRV systems are the same. There are different flavors of it, and we've seen them across the country differ depending on who is putting it on the ballot and who are the coalition members. In New York City specifically, ranked choice voting is only used in their primary, so that's one specific example, right? They have a primary and they only use ranked choice voting there. Alaska has a different system as well. They use it for their House of Representatives, but if you're passing it on a statewide level, you could also choose which elected offices you're going to use ranked choice voting for. So you can choose what type of ranked choice voting or IRV you want.
Thank you. Don, would you like me to repeat the question?
I've read a lot of anecdotal things. I can't point myself to any particular article, but I would defer to Marcela and Ken on that, because that's something they have a lot more experience with.
Thank you. Our next question: who will train the residents in how to use ranked choice? Let's start with Helen.
That's a great question. So at the Registrar of Voters office, it is our duty to put out voter education as much as we can. We do outreach. We partner with community-based organizations to register people to vote, to train them how to get to the polls, to get them the information they need. However, in this situation where it is city-specific, we would be able to work with the city to create messaging, but the responsibility truly would need to fall on the city. We're partners with the city in this respect. But I would hesitate to say that that the responsibility would fall on the Registrar of Voters in full.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, Miranda, Ken?
Yes, it's a broad-based education effort that would be needed. And as we heard in New York City, there's a successful example there with people with understanding rates of 90% and above. So it is possible to do it. And already we've been meeting with people, and I know that the folks from the county and the city have already been anticipating, if this measure passes, the outreach that would be necessary with community-based organizations or nonprofits to be able to inform voters and educate voters and get them that messaging. So it would not be a direct partnership for in some cases, but complementary efforts among city, county, and the community-based organizations.
Thank you. Don?
Thank you. I can't speak for any community outside of Richmond. I don't vote any place other than that. But I have attended all these city council meetings where this has been discussed, and numerous times it has been brought up that it's the responsibility of the city and the city clerk to come up with a plan to educate the voters, not relying upon any outside groups to put it together. It's great to be able to partner with them, but it's still the responsibility of the city and the city clerk. And from my discussions with her, that they were not even looking at a cost. They understand it may cost many tens of thousands of dollars to come up with programs to train people on how to use ranked choice, but they're not spending any time or money even on that part of it until they find out whether this is passed or not, because this will not be implemented for another 2 years or a year and a half, depending upon the primary date. But there's plenty of time for them to do it, but they get plenty on their plate right now without having to worry about something that may or may not even be applicable.
This came up in the discussion earlier on the panel. For each of your perspectives, what happened to cause the lawsuits in the Oakland School Board races? Helen?
Well, human error. Like it was pointed out, there was to my understanding in Alameda County, there was a setting that wasn't set correctly. It wasn't the fault of the system. It was I don't want to say fault, but it was an error in humans. And I think that just speaks to, if it is implemented, the need for the on-site support and training before my staff would feel competent and confident to run a ranked choice voting election. It is complex. And given the publicity that would surround a failure, we could not afford to fail.
Ken, Miranda?
Thank you for that. And we don't want to put anyone in a position to fail. We don't want to set up anyone to fail. That would be the worst possible outcome for all of us. I do think that, Don, the fine print that you mentioned in the initiative is actually meant to speak to that. That if the computer systems are not yet ready, then the election would not be held using a system that is not 100% online and running well. So we would not want to put the elected officials and the voters in the position of using a system that was not ready for prime time. So that is the reason for the fine print, as you called it, which is actually not fine print, but the same typeface as the other materials. It's right there for anyone to see, and that says that if the systems are not ready in the 2026 election, then this system would not be used.
Am I able to add on to Ken's comment?
There's still a minute remaining, yes.
Just to add on to that as well, it's really important that our county registrars and our city clerks are, willing to work with organizations like Fair Vote or Rank the Vote Resource Center and Cal RCV, because we're here to provide you the resources and the tools so that you can implement ranked choice voting. And in Alameda County, we've had some issues with some of the folks that are in leadership over there, which is part of the reason why the software or the human error occurred. But like I said, we have so many folks that are getting the tools and the resources now to get ranked choice voting or IRV implemented in several cities and jurisdictions across the country.
Thank you. Don?
Thank you. Thank goodness I never screw up. It happens to everybody. But I have full faith in Ms. Nolan here that nobody in her department is going to screw up. She's going to have them properly trained. Everything is going to go perfectly. But humans are humans, and sometimes they do make mistakes. And machines have been known to make mistakes too. So anything can happen, but that's not my big concern. And the fine print that I was mentioning on there, that little clause in there, that was specifically mentioned when they made the motion to put this on. And the rationale explained at the time had nothing to do with if the machines or the human beings made a mistake. It had to do with if the city determined that they didn't have the money to conduct a ranked choice election. They could then choose not to do it. And that kind of concerns us. We're spending an awful lot of time, effort, and money on these two measures. They could all be null and void if the council, whoever's sitting on the council, when this comes up again to be implemented, just says, no, we like what we've got. We're not going to do it, because there's no definition about what's what it means to be practical. And that's a concern I've got. We do that a lot here in Richmond, where we speak in general terms without being very specific on our emotions. But that's my concern there.
Thank you. I do want to pause and apologize. Marcela, your name is Marcela and not Miranda. I've said that like 3 or 4 times. I apologize.
It's okay. I figured you were calling me by my last name. It happens often, don't worry.
Okay, I was close. Let's go ahead to our next question. In your opinion, which system is most expensive to operate? Helen?
Potentially. Can I bring up my slide deck? I've got a cost comparison.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. I have to do some math.
She's like, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Okay. While he's pulling that up, we'll go to another question.
Okay, thank you.
No pressure, no pressure. Which California communities use ranked choice voting? Helen, you're on the hot spot now, I'm sorry. Hot seat. Which California communities use ranked choice?
That's with the ranked choice there, not with her. She's doing the totals for you.
Okay, so I'll go with Marcela and Ken.
So currently, ranked choice voting is used in San Francisco, in San Leandro, in Oakland and Berkeley. Redondo Beach, Eureka and Albany have already passed it, but those 3 specific cities are working on implementation as we speak.
Okay. Don, do you have any response to that? Okay. Another question. In your awareness, which system is most error prone? Marcela, Ken?
I don't necessarily have the statistics on me. Like I said, from what I do know is that in terms of ballot errors, it's the same rate when you have plurality elections and IRV elections. The error rate is about the same.
Well, if you believe one of the candidates from 2020, it's apparently everyone where he lost was all broken. Yeah, I couldn't give you an answer on that. I don't have the statistics on that.
Thank you. In your opinion, which system is most complicated for voters? Marcela and Ken?
As I mentioned earlier, it's hard to get folks to go out and vote with our current system. Ranked choice voting, or IRV, there is a bit of a learning curve initially, but once you explain it to folks, what we've found across community organizations and across the country is that once they understand how to rank their ballot, it's pretty straightforward. I think the bigger question is, how do we get people to turn out more often and get motivated to come to the polls?
Thank you.
Yeah, I would only add 2 words to that: electoral college. If people can understand the electoral college system, they can understand ranked choice voting. I have great faith in people's ability to understand complex systems and maneuver with them. So.
Thank you. Don?
I think we've got it in us all to be able to figure out how to do ranked choice. But now we're back on the real planet. We got people that can't figure out how to do regular elections. They can't figure out how to fill in bubbles. With my own union, I am the election chair, and we put pictures of how to fill in the bubbles, and we get people with X's across them. We've got people that go way outside the line. People will fill out more bubbles than they're supposed to. The potential is there for errors, no matter which kind of system you've got on there. And but if we do a better job of trying to educate the people, maybe we won't have quite as many problems as we've had in the past. But the potential is there, and that should scare us all. Thanks.
Thank you. These may be questions more for Helen. Here's a question from the audience. People feel that RERA would disenfranchise voters. All voters now get absentee ballots. So how would RERA disenfranchise anyone when voting is so simple now?
I don't know that it would. Honestly, we could implement either system. That's our job. Our job is to make sure that whatever measure passes, or if neither pass, that we continue to serve our voters in the best way that we possibly can. California law states that all active registered voters receive a vote-by-mail ballot in the mail. That's whether it's a primary, a general, a special, any election. Everyone gets a ballot. It's then up to that voter on whether they want to vote and return the ballot. And I think outreach and voter education would be needed to encourage people to participate regardless of which method is implemented.
Thank you. Marcela, Ken?
As I mentioned earlier, and as Ms. Nolan just said in her statement, I think the biggest thing is getting people to turn out and getting them empowered and motivated to come out to the polls. I think a lot of that has to do with our current political climate and also the candidates that are running for office. One of the benefits of IRV is that we encourage more candidates to run for office, and you have more choices when it comes to candidates, so you're not feeling like you're stuck voting between two people or two candidates that you're not necessarily a fond of, or you have one candidate that you love, but another candidate that you absolutely loathe, and now you'll have a mixture of candidates running for office.
Thank you. Don?
Thank you. I don't believe either one of these, or even the current system, really disenfranchises anybody from voting. Can we do a better job? You betcha we can. I think we all need to. I think as community activists, those of us that live here in Richmond, I wouldn't expect Marcela to come back up from San Diego to encourage us to vote, but we need to do a much better job of trying to encourage everybody that is eligible to vote. They changed the U.S. Constitution when I turned 18, back in 1972, and I've voted every single election since then. I mean, I've take advantage of the franchise that's been afforded to me. I own an online newspaper, and I do what I can to try to put out as much information about the elections as possible, including a pictorial of all the voting boxes, showing people not just maps of where they're at, but where the voting boxes located, a picture on there. I put out a list of all the polling places to try to do that. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that can be done to try to get people to vote, get them registered to vote, get them to actually vote itself. A lot more can be done, a lot more needs to be done, a lot more should be done. And it's incumbent upon all of us. Maybe the league can help us out. But we just need to do a better job than what we have been doing, because everybody should vote. I mean, I'm sure you can show me statistics of countries where everybody has to vote. I've even seen or heard about some where you're required to vote. Unfortunately, they fill the ballots out for you in advance. But anyway, more can be done.
Thank you. Helen, are you ready to answer the question about cost?
Yeah, I just looked back at my notes, and speaking in generalities, because there are a lot of variables that can happen in every election. We have a base cost because a ballot goes out to everyone. We look at registered voters, not turnout. Turnout has very little to do with our costs, to be honest. Estimated, a primary and a general could run the city $350,000 a year in an election year. Ranked choice voting, moving beyond the one-time $150,000 cost, with all the extra costs that it would incur, could run $300,000, $350,000 a year. Financially, there may be differences, but if we're talking in generalities without knowing all the nuances, they more than likely would cost roughly the same.
Thank you.
Yeah. None of my slide.
This is probably more so for Helen. Can I vote for second or third place and skip my first choice? That's the question.
Well, I'm going to defer to Marcela for this. My answer would be you can vote whatever you want, and we will count what we can. However,
Yes, you can do that, but again, we would encourage you not to do something like that. And there was a question earlier about the flavors of RCV and the technicalities that come with it. When you are talking about those specifics, you can decide whether you want to suspend certain ballots if something is left blank. But in most cases, you don't, people usually don't opt out to do something like that. So yes, your ballot will still be counted if you decide to leave something blank in certain circumstances, depending on what the current jurisdiction decides to do.
Don? One more question, then we're going to jump to a question from the audience. Can I vote for one person multiple times? These are questions, we're building an understanding.
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't know if you were going to respond.
Helen, are you deferring to Marcela? There you go, thank you.
No, you cannot do that. You can only vote for one person one time. If you do that, only the first round is going to be counted for that person.
Thank you. This is kind of a question, kind of a statement, but I'd like to hear from the panelists. If Measure J or L wins, Richmond will not vote by district, but as the city as a whole. It's a question from the audience. So again, we're building understanding this evening. Let me start with Helen, and then Marcela, and then Don.
the answer would be no. Districts are in the law, they're in the charter. Richmond is districted, and voters would continue to vote within their district. Now, for the mayor, they would vote as a whole. The mayor would be on everyone's ballots, but the city council would continue to be done by districts, ranked choice within those districts.
Thank you. Marcela, Ken, do you have anything to add?
No, I think the confusion is understandable because we've been through this cycle of switching, whether we are districts or at large. So I think the confusion is understandable, and it would be good to include that in outreach materials to make sure people understand.
Thank you. Don?
I agree with Ken that we need to make sure the public do understand that, and Helen, I appreciate what she said. It is the law. It would require us to actually go to court to go back off of the district. And just an example, before Attorney Rafferty hit up the city of Richmond to force us to go with district elections, he did it to our West Contra Costa Unified School District. The school district challenged him on that. By the time that we settled, we had to pay the $318,000 attorney fees for him. He was his own attorney, so that money went into his pocket. You're going to lose. There's only been one lawsuit in the past 20 some odd years that has been successful in defeating that. I don't know how they did it, but Richmond just doesn't have that kind of money to be fighting this kind of an action. When the possibility, not just that we're going to lose, but we may have to pay $1 million or $2 million in attorney fees.
Thank you.
Attorney fees for the other side, plus our attorney fees. Thank you.
Thank you. Another clarifying question about what ranked choice voting would look like for a district election. If there are 2 candidates for District 1, 4 candidates for District 2, 3 candidates for District 3, what would the process look like for voting if we were moving to ranked choice voting?
Well,
Let me start with Helen, and then.
Thank you. Again, this is my assumption, and not having run a ranked choice voting election in my past. What it would look like to the voter is they would see the same candidates on their ballot that they would see if nothing was changed. They would only see those within their district and only be able to vote on those that are running within their district. The difference would be how many bubbles do they have to fill in. The way the system is now, it's a vote for one. And if you vote for two, it's an overvote. And if my office can't determine which one you meant, we can't count either.
Marcela, Ken?
No, I was wise to thank you. But I will say that if the question implies that you'd see candidates from other districts on your ballot, then that would not be the case. You would only see candidates in your district. And if your district had 2 candidates and someone else's district had 4 candidates, they would see the 4, you would see the 2, if that's the basis for that question.
I'm going to defer to Helen, but I'm just using common sense here. If you've got a district, like you said, that only have 2 candidates, you would not see ranked choice on the ballot with those. But if you've got a district with 3 candidates, then ranked choice would come into play. To me, that's common sense, but if I'm wrong, please correct me on that.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. More of a statement, but I would like to know your thoughts. Candidates can stack the vote by asking voters to pick certain candidates for second and third choice. What are your thoughts on that statement? Helen?
Defer to the experts.
Marcela, Ken?
So with IRV, you want a coalition build, as mentioned, and when you're talking about, our current elections or plurality elections, a perfect example of somebody gaming the system is, our California senatorial race earlier this year, we had 4 candidates. Barbara Lee, Katie Porter did not make it through the primary, but that was because the top Democrat funded ads for his opponent, the Republican, and so that is an issue that we want to solve with ranked choice voting by doing coalition building and having candidates work with one another, so that we're not gaming the system the way that this top Democrat did against the Republican.
We got ourselves a little bit of a semantics here. They call it coalition building. Other people call it collusion. We saw it in 2010 in Oakland with Don Parada. The first 8 out of the 9 rounds, he was clearly ahead of everybody else by, it started out with 9 percentage points above second place. But you had candidates saying, vote for me number 1 and her number 2. She'd say, vote for her number 1 and me number 2. Whatever we do, we can't allow him to get elected. That was embarrassing on something like that. Big article in the Chronicle over on like Saturday or Sunday, almost a third of a page, talking about you've got almost the exact same thing going on in San Francisco on the mayor's race. Is whatever we do, we got to make sure we game the system so that that person doesn't get reelected to be the mayor. That's a concern for me. We don't see that kind of thing with what the Richmond Election Reform Act is calling for, or what we have currently. But you see it on a ranked choice all too frequently. That's not democracy, in my opinion. That's trying to manipulate the system, to gaming the system.
Thank you. Next question. Where would Richmond get the money to pay for these new measures? Richmond is in debt. I'll start with Helen. You may defer.
I don't sit on the city council, so I don't have an answer for that.
Marcela, Ken?
Similar to Ms. Nolan here, I don't sit on the city council, so I don't have the answer to that.
Don?
I don't sit in the city council either, but I sit right over there and I listen to everything they have to say. And they are spending the $50 million a year they expect to get from Chevron for the next 10 years like it's going out of style. Of course, I'm not sure they would appreciate having to use it for election purposes. But if we get $50 million a year for the next 10 years, we're not going to be in debt anymore. We're going to have money just falling out of everybody's pockets. So the money will be there. What they do with it, that's a different story.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to our panelists this evening. Before we move to closing, I would like to correct a statement that I made earlier this evening. The dates and times will not be posted on the screen at the end of the webinar. Please look for the recording on the social media channels of our co-hosting organizations. I will now pass it to the League of Women Voters of West Contra Costa County President. I'm sorry, thank you. We will now move to 3 minutes for closing statements from each of the panelists. Helen, will you please begin?
I'd be honored to, thank you. I didn't prepare a closing statement, so I'm just going to talk. I appreciate everyone who's watching, everyone who's here. I so appreciate the League of Women Voters inviting me to be here to speak on behalf of the Registrar's Office. I just want to put this out there. Whether these measures pass, or whether one passes, or they both fail, we will continue to do our best to serve the voters of Contra Costa County in the best possible way with honesty, transparency, and integrity. That is our job. If we are tasked with implementing a new way of voting for Richmond, we will do so with the highest of honesty and transparency and accuracy as we possibly can. And that is our pledge to the citizens of and the residents of Contra Costa County. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcela, Ken?
As Ms. Nolan mentioned, thank you again for hosting this, for doing your due diligence, and for keeping voters updated with what's going to be on their ballot. As someone, as I mentioned earlier, as someone who has worked on campaigns for a few years now, it's so important to give voters that information that they need and let them know what they're voting for and to really get them out to vote. That being said, I want to reiterate that Cal RCV exists to bring a more equitable democracy to California and its jurisdictions. Again, as someone who's worked on campaigns, the reason why I'm working on this now is because I'm tired of our current system. I'm tired of some of the politicians that are being elected, and I want to see change. I want to see new leadership across the board. And really, it just comes down to the system and several of the entities and the apparatus that exists politically right now. I want to reiterate that Measure L is supported by SEIU and city workers, local organizations, local environmental organizations, local teachers, people who are showing up every day and coming to work here in Richmond. This is community-backed, it's community-funded, and this is something that the community wants. That being said, let's build a more inclusive democracy here in Richmond, where everyone is received and all voices and voters are heard because they all matter. Vote for Measure L, a low-cost way to include, almost low-cost way, to include more voices and offer more choices while ensuring majority support for our city councilors and the mayor and ultimately electing folks that we really want to see in office. Thank you.
Thank you. Don?
Sorry, Ken, going to use the remaining time?
She said it all.
All right, good. Thank you. First, I want to thank the league, thank KCRT, thank everybody for being here tonight, especially Helen Nolan. She's provided so much very valuable information. As I mentioned earlier, that we've had a lot of disinformation that's been spouting out. Everybody's an expert. Everybody you talk to, you've got to go on our social media here in Richmond, where you've got expert after expert after expert that can't even spell ranked choice voting. They can't spell RERA, but that doesn't stop them from being an expert on things, so it's helpful to have somebody that knows what they're talking about. And regardless of the tone that I used in my prepared speech, these are good and decent people. Yeah, even if she does come from outside this area, she's still a good and decent person. I don't mean Helen, I mean Marcela there. But we have fundamental differences of opinion on the issue itself. And I do want to read something that was given me to this afternoon from a newspaper article from the San Francisco Chronicle. Just a couple of excerpts there from former mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, the governor right now. He had vetoed Senate Bill 212. But some of the The quote, he said, "Ranked choice is an experiment that has been tried in several charter cities in California," Newsom said in his veto message Sunday. "Where it has been implemented, I am concerned that it has often led to voter confusion and that the promise that ranked choice voting leads to a greater democracy is not necessarily fulfilled." He continues, "The cure being proposed is far worse than the disease," Newsom said. "We do not believe that the Board of Supervisors, San Francisco, should be experimenting with San Franciscans' hard-fought right to vote. Primaries and runoff elections have served our nations well for most of its history." And he concludes, "Would more evidence change the governor's mind?" This is in the article. "Would more evidence change the governor's mind? During a campaign bus trip to San Jose last year, a reporter asked Newsom if he planned to take San Francisco's ranked choice experience statewide. Newsom just rolled his eyes. Okay, this is a man that was mayor of San Francisco, for 8 years during ranked choice. Doesn't seem to have the best opinion of it. I still believe that ranked choice is not what's best for the city of Richmond. I think there's problems with it, as confusion in particular, cost being another, and the potential for abuse of the system. That has got me really concerned because I've seen it so many other times in Oakland and in San Francisco. And I know what we're capable of here in Richmond. Things have gotten very hostile over this. If you follow social media, whether it's Nextdoor or the Facebook sites, personal interactions, people, they take this very seriously, one way or the other. I'm not saying there are any innocents on either side. There are plenty of guilty people. We should be able to think about these issues and have a discussion. And then when we fill out our ballot, make the decision then on there without becoming violent.
We're at time.
I guess I'm done.
Thank you. I would like to pass it now to the president of the League of Women Voters, West Contra Costa County, Cheryl Collier, to close us out.
Good evening. Yes, I am Cheryl Collier. I'm the president. Thank you. I'm going to start again. My name is Cheryl Collier, and I am the president of the League of Women Voters for West Contra Costa County. I'd like to thank our co-host, Black Women Organization for Political Action, known as BWAPA, the Richmond Chamber of Congress, the Richmond branch of the NAACP, and of course, our league chapter, and KCRT for making this forum possible. The Zoom video will be posted to our co-host's social media and also to our Facebook page, so people can view this at a later date. And I came up with the idea that I might approach the Richmond Library and see if they can Zoom it out to their members and what have you, so we can have a broad audience of people who will see it. And of course, for our audience, the few people who came out tonight, I'd like to thank them and the panelists that participated in trying to educate us on this very important issue. And that said, thank you and good night.